So I had a back operation in May.
This year?
Yeah.
You okay?
Lower back?
Refused, refused
We would have,
screws, rods, apple, base.
Ken, you're down here.
you feel better though?
Well,
Apparently loose.
sit here, you'll vote better. You can help my voting record.
Take it easy. 8 weeks in. Riding skid steer. All right. All this walking. My back is hurting.
So I can still use the purpose, but we're just not gonna be able to delay.
Thank you. One thing my dad always said, he said, he thinks we should invest in quality and shoes and mattress, because that's where we spend 2/3 of your life. And that's important. Well, okay. Your special case. We get a good chair. I voted for you because I got your back now. Yeah, it's all crazy. Yeah. It was, they're going, they'll say that's.
All right, call this meeting of the first meeting of the Natural Resources Subcommittee to order. And welcome everyone, thank you for being here. We, just as an aside, we've got the bills we have today, but we've got at least 18 on our docket to complete next week. So a lot of those will go quickly, and hopefully most of them will go. Don't plan too much after 4 o'clock tomorrow, I mean, next Wednesday. Is that an offer? Okay. Is there a sign?
I'll do have to report.
The only person who signed up was Keen, who was just here. And I just- oh, there you go.
Wait, is there anybody else here?
I'm sorry, I thought you'd gone out the back door, so.
We got a couple
All right.
more.
Yeah.
I got my entire subcommittee to myself.
Since you signed up, we'll hear you.
Well, good afternoon after a long day, fellow agriculture committee members. And seeing that my good friend Matt Burris is here, I think I know what kind of situation my bill's gonna be in. I'm just kidding. Matt and I we've been spending a lot of time on a couple of other issues. But this bill is a bill that I prepared on my own with absolutely no input from anybody else, because it raised in my mind a question of not only public policy, but also a question of how we as the Commonwealth govern ourselves and our state government works and how we implement some laws. And I've been in and around policy and politics now for 30 years, and I've had a chance to work in different organizations. And one thing I learned in politics from policymakers I've worked with, one thing I've learned, and I've adopted this as my principle, is I never legislate on headlines. Meaning just because a controversy happens or just some news story happens doesn't mean I'm going to do something about that. Just to specifically say I want to be part of this conversation. So as a general policy, I don't like to do things just because there's a scandal or controversy. But what's happened over the last several months on a particular issue that involves the Department of Environmental Quality's Air Pollution Control Board and how the governor's appointees were treated in the way their terms expired. And on top of that, the proceeding that was before that in light of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline permit that was a compressor station at Union Station. Bill, when all that happened, as I was being contacted by a lot of people, constituents and others, asking me about my views on that, it got me thinking, and as I did more research, what I realized is above and beyond all the headlines and scandals, I think the real issue is none of us as legislators have any idea what happens in these citizens' boards. Because number one, 100% of all the appointees are made by the governor and the governor himself. Number two, the terms stagger so that 7 members' terms stagger along the different ways. So no one governor has the opportunity to appoint all 7, but it is still the governors that appoint these folks. And the legislature has absolutely no say about that. Obviously, we do write the laws that DEQ and DEQ citizen boards to execute, but our laws, as you know, are not very detailed. We don't have line by line by line, very micromanaging bills on this is what the air pollution control standard ought to be, this is how you ought to be doing this, these are the kinds of permits you should be getting. Instead, we give a very broad general views about what we think the policy should be. And then the executive branch then interprets that, and then it sends it over to the citizen boards. Citizens, regular citizens, not paid, regular folks like you and me, our neighbors, get on this board, and they make decisions based on the broad perimeter of what we say is a policy goal. Then they interpret that, and the DEQ staff doesn't have a say to overrule what the citizen board does or doesn't do. Because the citizen board then determines what the code is, and it comes up with its own ways of interpreting it. And so if there's an actual permit in front of the citizen board, the members of the citizen board make decisions that I believe are within public policy making and possibly legislative, not just executive branch functions. And once that decision is made, DEQ staff, who are the ones that we charge with, the governor's political appointees and other bureaucrats who work on this in a professional way, they don't really have a chance to overrule. And then the only thing that you can do in terms of overruling a decision is to go to the courts, create more litigation. So I wasn't sure if that's the right way for us to implement some of these environmental laws, air, water, and waste management. And on top of that, what I've found in recent days of looking at this, recent months and days of looking into this, is that Virginia apparently is unique in that of all the other states, we're the only state that has multiple functions that we give to the citizen boards. We give them both the executive powers of implementing these rules, but we also give them regulatory powers to issue permits or deny permits. And that, my understanding, and somebody can correct me, my understanding is that is, Virginia's the only state that does that with citizen boards. So the reason I bring this bill up, and my solution to this, or at least the first cut of my solution, is to see if there's a way that the legislative branch can have some say in the jurisdiction, maybe by having us, through the speaker, through the majority of the Senate, with the agriculture committee members having some say. If we were to appoint some citizen members, maybe that might add a little bit of the public policy legislative branch folks as part of the citizen board. I don't think that's the perfect answer, but at least it was, for me, my first cut at trying to address this idea that this board is run by the executive branch. I've heard from folks on all sides that say that may or may not be a good idea, but the idea that this conversation should happen now, in light of what we just saw over the last few months, is certainly a timely thing. So, Mr. Chairman, I would just conclude my part of this by saying, the bill as I drafted it simply would say, of the 7 members, why don't we have some of those members be appointed by the State House, some by the State Senate, some by the governor. We don't change any of the criteria, we don't change any of the functionality to do that, but just by having that conversation of the need for possible reform, I'm hoping that you all and others who are interested will engage with me over the next months or years to see if there's a better way for us to do this, so that what we saw in the very unfortunate scandal that we saw with this governor and with the appointments and the citizen board members whose names were unfortunately implicated, that they don't end up becoming a political pawn, but rather that we have a policy conversation that lets our state do the job its best it can. So with that, I'm happy to listen to your questions, comments, and I don't have anybody that I've asked specifically to come and speak for or against it. I just thought I'd come in front of you and tell you what I think.
I appreciate that. So, King, anybody have any questions?
How would you, Delegate King, how would you appoint members in the interim when we're not in session, like the governor did this year?
That's a good question, and I think the way we normally do it is, if we're talking about judicial branch, like judges and SEC, then the governor has recent appointment opportunities while the General Assembly is out of session. If it's a legislator-appointed position, you don't need the legislative body to be in session at that time, because the speaker can write a letter saying, I'm appointing you, the majority leader of the Republican, or the Senate can say, I'm appointing you, and their terms will start on, I guess it's July 1 and expires June 30th. So I think what I would do, based on the way we've drafted this bill, is to follow the current traditional ways of the governor and the legislators appointing boards for citizen boards. Again, the only reason why the governor would do a recess appointment is if it's a judicial or SEC type situation. But if it's not, it's like any other board. Scott, I think that's the way it works, right? All the other citizen boards, it's just the speaker appoints throughout the year, there's different names.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Did you hear that? It takes it off.
I have a question for staff.
Okay.
Historically, has the General Assembly ever appointed members based on majority, minority parties? For example, could the speaker be charged with the responsibility of appointing a representative from the minority party and then also from the majority party?
I can't say that I'm familiar with that situation. I don't know why it wouldn't be able to happen technically, but I can't think of a board.
Actually, on line 28, it talks about it needs to be done without regard to political.
Right. Jim, I might say, I certainly hope that we would go down a path of making these boards partisan.
Well, no, I'm not, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to avoid partisanship here. The reason for the question is that, you know, the comment that the patron made earlier, that there's a lot of gut reactions, and it happens even with policymakers, is that if we were to have a board that is appointed and in the public's eyes viewed as equal, whether, you know, you're a Republican or a Democrat, that we're actually avoiding partisanship, because obviously if you have a Republican Speaker of the House, that could result in being all Democrats being appointed, and the public may view that as not being fair, and vice versa. If you had a Democrat who was Speaker of the House, they may appoint a Republican appointing Republicans, and a Democrat Speaker appointing Democrats. So I think the point I'm trying to make is from a fairness perspective, that we would actually be avoiding the partisan issue by having representation equally from both the minority and the majority parties.
Dr. King, isn't it the case today that the various boards that you mentioned, the members who are appointed are approved by the General Assembly?
I'm not sure. I think it's one of those like big block votes that we do every so often. Yeah, so I mean, I guess from that perspective, we do have, as you know, Dr. Plum, over the last 10 years I've served in this body, and many years you've been here. When we say the House and Senate oversee the executive branch, we're not talking about what you see on C-SPAN with congressional oversight, where you have hours and hours of hearings and meetings and staff supporting it. It literally is a 30-second vote that we get with about 50 or 60 names at a time that come through. The chairman of the Privileged Elections Committee puts in a resolution that says, these are all the governor's appointees. They all go through. Once in a while, like what we saw this morning, when somebody does become a controversial nominee, then somebody pulls it out of the block, and then we have a separate vote. But 99.9% of the times, if the governor appoints somebody, we, the General Assembly, kind of fall in line and just say, fine, that's fine with me. And I think, Delegate Plum, you're raising a really good point, which is the reason why I wanted to bring this bill up, which is, well, I thought in my time down here, the legislative branch does very little oversight of the executive branch. I just believe that as a matter of separation of powers and checks and balances, that is one of the weakest parts of Virginia government system, that we have, as part-time legislators, we have very little oversight. Now, the trade-off is the governor serves one term, and so he or she is gone in 4 years, and so we stick around, they go, but the reality is while they're in town, they appoint 3,000 people as citizens and appointments, and we don't have any oversight. So to the extent that the legislature, the people's body, can represent the people's interests in a non-political, non-partisan way to ensure that the executive branch is doing what we believe is the right policy, I think that's where I'm trying to draw the line. Like I said, and I'll admit readily that this bill is not the perfect solution. I just wanted to get a conversation started so that all of us who care about these issues are thinking long-term, what is the best way for Virginia to move forward? Sorry. Yes, sir.
But the functions that we're talking about, these boards conducting, are those legislative functions or administrative functions? It looks to me like, for example, the issuance of permits and building on regulations are really an executive function. and that we really do have an oversight responsibility in the appointments. While there's been few people taken off, maybe that's a compliment to the governor in terms of how they make their appointments, but also is the fact that every now and then we do take somebody off those lists.
Sure, and Delegate Plum, I absolutely agree with you that, the key for me is that delicate balance between what is considered to be legislative branch functions, which is policy making, and executive branch function, which is policy implementation. Now, there's a very big gray area between those two, I mean, it depends on how you define the board policy. My understanding, the way I read the code and the way I've talked to some of these folks, and I've attended 2 of the last AR board meetings, one here, and then both of them in Richmond, different locations. What I found, and this is me being in the room, listening and watching the actual proceeding of the current composition of the board members, what I found is that each of the board members themselves are confused about what that gray line is. And none of the DQ staff nor the Attorney General staff, I mean, at least not public, because we weren't part of the private conversations, but at least what they said publicly didn't define. For example, on this one particular Atlantic Coast Pipeline compressor station, you had one board member at the public hearing saying, I believe that I need to look at the economic impact of the Atlantic pipeline. I believe it's a good thing for me. And it turns out this gentleman who has some conflicts of interest because he works for a company that has a contract with Smithfield, the guy actually said, this is good for Hampton Roads, and that's why I'm voting on it. I am voting for this because it's good for economic development for my district. So he made it absolutely clear that his vote is based on economic activities. The person next to him said, I'm only limited based on what I believe the statute says to only vote on the compressor station and its air and nothing else. And based on that, I believe the air is not going to be any more harmful to the residents of Union Hill versus other Virginians. So I'm going to limit myself and I'm going to vote that way. So you have 2 board members sitting there with completely different understanding of what their statutory authority is, and nobody else questioned them, and none of us could ask them questions because we didn't have a sense of opportunity to ask questions as the public. So those are some of the questions I have that I'd like to address. Yes.
Delegate, up to your question.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman. You know, substantively, I like this a lot, but I have questions about where in code, or maybe perhaps our attorney here can help. Where in code does it address how this is implemented? For example, you know, is there a point where we would confirm by vote that we have an opinion on this one way or another? And then later when it says vacancies occurring other than by expiration of term shall be filled by the appointing authority, I don't fully understand how that would be implemented. You know, is this a group gets together? I just can't find it here. I don't know if that should be, is it in the code someplace else, or?
Mr. Chairman, I'd answer Delegate Adams by saying that it probably doesn't matter at this stage because my bill's not going to go anywhere, and because those are parts of the different parts of the codes that deal with appointments and all of the logistics of how we implement it. But if there's a concern about who should fill the vacancies and such, then I think we've already gone way beyond what I wanted to do, which is to get the conversation about what the policy ought to be. I think the code section does address in different parts, different pieces, how we do appointments, and the appointing authority there would be the governor for the governor's appointments, speaker for the speaker's appointments, and then the majority.
Corresponding
Yeah,
appointment.
so there would be some language somewhere in the code, and if there is, I'm concerned to draft it, but if the bill moves forward, I would be happy to sit down and draft that with you.
Yeah, that's all.
Chairman, so Delegate Keem, one thing I'm not understanding, and maybe I'm just not listening carefully enough. I think you said that this is a bill that's intended to improve the legislative branch's oversight of these boards. I don't see the connection between who appoints someone. It doesn't give the legislature any additional oversight function, for instance, to deal or clarify with the point you were making, that two people bringing 2 different perspectives. Unless you're talking about the General Assembly appointing members of the General Assembly to these boards, which under this language, by the way, I think the Speaker or the Senate could, which I don't think is what the intent of a citizen board is. So whoever appoints the person doesn't control whether we have any oversight, or for that matter, have any input any longer into what policy they might adopt. It's just where the appointment comes from. Do I have that right?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd answer Delegate Sullivan by saying that you're certainly heading in the right direction of the types of concerns. And again, going back to my original premises, we don't do a lot of oversight to start with because we're a part-time legislature. Our legislative staff are limited to JLARC and a couple of other staff and appropriations that can maybe look at some of the funding issues. So to the extent that we lack mechanisms, existing law to do oversight of the executive branch, that is certainly a problem. I don't think I personally, through this bill, can fix that at all. What I'm trying to do here is to point out the fact that we have a lot of major decisions being made by the executive branch, much of which I believe are in the policy realm and not in the executive branch implementation realm. That's being done by 100% of appointees made by the governor, with no input from any of us as a people's branch. So this is the kind of if you see the problem as a nail, the only tool you have is a hammer, what have you. This is my way of saying the board is where some of these questions came up over the last few months. So let me start with the board and the functionalities of who's on the board as a beginning step. But I've also been told in the last few months of talking to some stakeholders that there are some folks that say, absolutely, we must have public citizen boards, no question about it. And I agree with them. We have to have public citizen boards. So we don't want this to turn into a legislative board where we want to have public citizens. But on the other side of the coin, some people say, we don't need citizen boards because this is really something that the DEQ should be doing on their own. DEQ staff, they should hire more staff if they don't have enough to do the functionalities of these boards, because you're talking about permits, issuing economic analysis, all these different aspects of this. So I think you've got a broad spectrum of people, maybe in this room, maybe outside, who have an interest in seeing some things change. The status quo may or may not be working right now, and my first crack at this was as a legislator with my prerogatives as the people's branch and the policymaking branch. My goal was to say, can we at least start by talking about who serves on the board, so that no one governor, however powerful he or she may be, can say, you're getting on this board, you report to me, and if I don't like you, I'm gonna find some way to replace you with somebody else. Now, they're not supposed to do that based on politics, they're supposed to do it based on merits and conflict of interest, but what we saw in the last few months is that there are different ways that powerful politicians can influence decisions made by citizen boards and advisory boards, and I just want to make sure that we are starting that conversation about addressing that.
Mr. Chair?
Question, Deputy Delegate.
It seems to me that what I'm hearing in summary of this is that really it's looking to remove some of the power of the governor and place it in the legislature. And it also seems to me that, based on a couple of comments that you meant already, that this isn't ready for prime time.
No.
So I'm just wondering if there's a mechanism for this not to be presented then, or rather than be.
Well, first of all, I appreciate Delegate King, and I understand and agree with you on a lot of the ways the boards are appointed and the outcomes that those boards are result. But before we take action or not, does anyone in committee the audience like to speak in favor or opposition of the bill?
Mr. Chairman, I'm Brett Vassy. I'm the CEO of the Virginia Manufacturers Association. So we work really closely with all of these boards because they provide the permits that allow our 5,000 manufacturers to operate. We do not have a position on the bill, but let me tell you the policy implications that the delegates try to get to are important. The state of Virginia is going to enter into a multi-state compact very quickly called RGGI. It's a $2.5 billion price tag on electricity over the next 10 years and fundamentally change our energy market through environmental regulation. That's been done by a citizen board without your input. That's important. If we're going to use citizen boards to make major policy decisions that also have tax implications and regulation on other sectors, not just environmental permits, it may be something we want to think about. We're willing to have that dialogue. We do think citizen boards are important.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Delegate Wright.
I think that the point brought has been good, and the comments made. I just believe that this subcommittee is not in a position to really make these kind of decisions. This refers only to one board, and there would be many boards to be affected. I'm sure Delegate King, the patron, knows, feels the same way. And so I don't know exactly whether be a requirement to have a study of some sort, but I just don't think it would be anything that we would be able to pass on today as the subcommittee of agriculture. Today, I think it would be something we would be.
I I would concur with Delegate Wright, this is probably above our pay grade.
Ooh.
Well,
Honestly.
Mr. Chairman, has the administration been consulted with this?
Well, I've been told that by the governor's office through the DEQ that they don't like my building. And and I'm not sure if anybody's willing to say that publicly, but I certainly will. And two reasons. One, of course, is because we're taking powers away from the governor. And no governor in anywhere in America is going to willingly give up his or her power. But the other reason I think is because, to somebody's point, there really is no consensus on how best to reform it, because the status quo is what it is, but everybody is dissatisfied at some level with the system as it is. And so, rather than coming out and saying, let's do something instead, they just say, let's not do what I'm proposing. Is that accurate with the administration? Because I want to make sure I'm not speaking for them too much, but that's what I've been told is.
Now, do you have a question?
Well, yeah, I have I have a comment and a motion in Department.
Sure.
My comment is that, I don't believe that Mr. King thinks he's gonna need the governor to campaign for him this fall. And so I'm glad things.
Was that on tape somewhere?
I'm glad he feels that secure in the job he's doing. But, at this time, I'd like to gently lay it on the table, leave it in the purview of this committee in case we wanna act on different, think about it. I will say that the governor, none of these boards, like Department of Game and Fisheries and some of those things that matter to some of us here, staggered. And so no one governor makes an appointment and,
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion to lay on the table and a second, and it is non-debatable. So, but I do think it has opened up a lot of good discussion that needs to be had. So, thank you. Y'all ready to vote? All those in favor, laying the bill on the table, say aye. Aye.
It's a recorded vote.
Okay. I'm sorry.
All right.
Got this. And the staff told us that the machine is not, the television is not registering our votes. But she will record those if you wish.
Yeah.
Let us know the results. 5, well, let's see.
6 to 1.
6 to 1. 6 ayes, 1.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I really appreciate your time. I know that this is very unusual for one bill to take up this much time. I also don't see any of this patrons, so maybe.
We're gonna have some patrons on the
Oh,
patrons, that's
oh, yeah.
right.
But thank you so much. I really
Thank
appreciate
you,
your time. And I
Doug.
certainly look forward to working with you going forward.
Appreciate you. So let's, I saw Delegate Fowler is in a finance subcommittee that is meeting, and hopefully he'll get up here before we're finished. So let's go ahead and move on to the. All right, Delegate Barrett, let's have you. Which one do you want?
Mr. Chairman, is that from here?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about 1696. $16.96. It has an amendment. Let me tell you about that first. I'll tell you what the bill does, and then do it.
Mr. Chairman, the proper motion be to adopt.
I just thought we would first, but, you know, motion to adopt the amendment?
Just a line.
So line amendment on line 50, after property, strike owned by the operator or a passenger and insert by the owner or such property or his designee. Then on line 2, then on line 50, after N, strike D and insert a stationary. Then after other, on line 50, insert stationary. So basically with this,
Go ahead and move the amendments.
okay.
Motion to move the
Not
amendment.
the motion.
Second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Amended bill before us.
So, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, what this would allow us to do is, allow the owner of a piece of property or his designee to, shoot a nuisance species from his vehicle. Currently, the law, you're supposed to get out of your vehicle and not be touching your vehicle, in order to shoot shoot at anything with a gun. And so if you have a nuisance species, it's very difficult to do all of that before he escapes your vision. So, we have some coyotes and we have, some vultures that on the farms that give us trouble sometimes. And, they escape us before we can do something about it.
Mr. Chairman,
No, you're right.
does this include daylight and nighttime, just daylight?
Mr. Chairman, I'd say that's the way the law, the way this code, this bill currently reads, that would be so.
That would be what?
Be during daylight and nighttime hours.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman?
That's all.
I frankly didn't get a chance to scribble all this down, although I think I get the gist of what you're trying to do, Delegate Ferris. First off, stationary is a reference to the car, so the car has to be stopped.
Right.
Right. Does, maybe this is for council, but does your understanding, Delegate, of the changes you've made, what I found frankly most persuasive about this was that it's limited to someone doing this on their own property, not someone else's property,
It's
right?
them, it's
Is this-
them or their designee.
What does that
So,
mean?
so the designee, I guess, could be somebody that works for you, somebody you tell them, if you see a coyote
But it's on
chasing my
your property.
chasing my cows, you shoot at it.
So this does not, this would not allow someone to go anywhere else other than their own property and shoot a coyote at 2 o'clock in the morning, or a deer for that matter.
Right.
On someone else's property, right?
No, unless they've been instructed by the landowner to do that.
I have a question, just maybe it's a, you might come up?
Sir.
Comcast DJ. If someone has applied for a, kill permit for deer, and obviously that deer is deemed to be a nuisance, or they wouldn't have got the permit, this would allow them to do that as well. That's it, your intention?
I think so.
Mr. Chairman, Tom Guest came in with this reason, we don't have a position on this bill, but, I believe the way the current permit reads, since it is a deer, I don't believe they would fall under the nuisance species. Nuisance species is a specific list.
Okay.
So I don't think this would apply to kill permits, because kill permits, is a different section. So this would only apply to actual nuisance species, which is coyotes, groundhogs, starlings, and, feral hogs. So it's the actual list of nuisance species.
That answers my question. Doug, is up.
Mr. Chairman, so, City Slicker Sullivan learned a new term today, something called spotlighting.
Yep.
What effect does this have on the practice of spotlighting?
Was that for me?
I'll ask the patron and you can defer to. That's fine.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Sullivan, so spotlighting is when somebody casts a light across a piece of property to look at an animal such as a deer at night, which is illegal unless they have the landowner's permission. But that does not apply to a nuisance species like coyote, because you can hunt them at night, because it is a nuisance species. So if you're doing specifically for the nuisance species at night, you can cast a light, but you can't do it for game animals.
So do I have it right? This doesn't affect anything having to do with shooting a deer, because it's
No,
not
sir.
a nuisance species.
Correct, sir. So
And Delegate Ferris, this limits this activity to a piece of property you own. You're either shooting on your own property, or you've given someone permission to shoot on your own property.
Yes, sir. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's what I would.
Yeah, I initially, to be honest with you, I had some concerns that if it was not on your own property, that would be a loophole that everybody would be using when they got caught while
Sure.
shooting at a coyote. So, but on his own property, I got no problem.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, we actually met with our law enforcement division, and obviously they looked over very closely, and they were okay with the
right to currently shoot these nuisance animals at nighttime. Anyway, you hunt for them at night. And all this says is you can shoot them from a stationary vehicle. And these are very wily creatures, these guys.
Sure.
And, you know, you stop, you gotta stop.
You gotta come up with the, copyright that.
Stop, get out, and all that stuff, now it's gone. So that's the advantage of shooting from a stationary vehicle.
Well, that's a good question. No, I just.
All right, let's hear from the audience. Anyone in the audience have, like to speak in favor or opposition? Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, ready for motion? Move
Yes,
to
sir.
report. Second.
Have a motion to report in a second.
Second.
Morefield seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, vote on the board. Vote 7-0, the bill reports. What's your next?
My next bill, Mr. Chairman, is, the Department of Forestry in Buckingham County, would like to authorize the conveyance of a right-of-way easement to Robert and Karen Whistleman. The easement will allow an existing road across a portion of the Alabama State Forest. Ingress and egress and access for utilities from State Route 24 to the Whistleman's property. It's my understanding that there's an easement across there now, but it's not documented or recorded. And they worked out, the Department of Forestry in Buckingham, thinks that they're happy to do this for these adjoining landowners.
I've been these type bills before. Any questions? Anyone in the audience like to speak in favor or opposition?
And Mr. Chairman, we do have a substitute.
Oh,
Yeah, that's
We're on a roll here.
we got a motion to substitute.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of substitute, adopting substitute, say aye. Opposed, no. Substitute is before us. And what does a substitute do differently?
Mr. Chairman, it just contains technical changes. We got some feedback from General Services about technical errors.
All right.
Mr. Chairman?
Can I leave that?
Just ask a general question about this. Is there a cost to the state? And if there is, I was just wondering, the landowner, if they don't have to pay for the easement or make any kind of contribution, I just don't know how that works.
I didn't see if this was impact on the state. So that there's like a judgment.
Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding that the landowners who are sealing is paying all the costs associated with having this recorded, having the deed drawn and having it recorded.
Mr.
There is a
Chairman.
physical impact.
Mr. Chairman, also in the legislation, on line 10, it says, is the Department of Forestry authorized to make upon such terms as the department deems proper. So that would offer some protection as far as cover expenses.
Mr. Chairman, there was a prescriptive easement, and it was used to get to this property, but in order for them to get utilities, someone has to give an easement to the utility company. And so this would allow them to give an easement on their easement. To the property.
40 feet.
Yes, sir.
Any other discussion? We have a
Motion
motion.
report.
Move to report. Is there a second? Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of reporting, please vote. Bills reported 7-0. Thank you.
I should have brought my raw milk to this.
You should have. Delegate Fowler, you want to?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just flew up here late from finance, so I didn't bring my folders with me, but, I've got two bills here. I guess if you, Mr. Chairman, want to start off with 1612 first.
1612.
Now, what this bill does, is it has to do with the DGIF's ability, to manage its, its boat ramps, which, some of them they own outright and some of them they manage. But at any rate, what this bill would basically allow it to lease language, which prohibits DGIF from assessing a fee for people that use the ramps. Now, currently in Virginia, if you have the code, if you have, like in my case, multiple boats that are registered, then we're paying a fee to use the ramps. If you also purchase a fishing or hunting license, you can use the ramps without paying any fee. And then also, children 60 years or under are able to use the ramps. But again, that still leaves a number of folks that use the ramps, basically without anteing up. So, anyway, so what my bill does, again, it doesn't require DGIF to do anything, but it does give them the ability, if the board decides to do so, to charge some type of a fee for the use of ramps. Now, again, these ramps are obviously expensive to build new ones. They're also expensive to maintain the ones that they have. And so this is just a mechanism to allow them to potentially raise more revenue to do so. And again, it only impacts the people that use them. So, where I come from, if you want to play, you got to pay. So there you go.
Mr. Chair.
Delegate.
Speaking of the bill, would it be fair to characterize this then as restricting access to public waters?
I wouldn't characterize it that way. It only restricts the use if you want to use a DGI program. So again, it's just, but, there's plenty of other access to water. And you got again, we have DGI here if you have some questions I can't handle, but anyway, yes, sir.
So following up, that's a very good question. So if you're on a public waterway and there's other access to the waterway, I'm assuming that other access is private, so are there other public access ways?
Well,
That are not
the
DGIF?
DGIF has a bunch of wildlife management areas, again, that are, and many of them, not all of them, but many of them are located on waterways, and you can access the water that way. But again, some of them do have ramps. So again, now typically the ramps, now again, you gotta remember, these things are used for, launching and recovering boats. You don't go to a boat ramp to fish, you don't go to the boat ramp to picnic, or things like that typically. This is strictly for the ingress and egress of folks, launching boats. So in other words, having access, so there are plenty of public areas, state parks and all that provide just general access to, for general recreation, So, this is strictly just the ramps.
Delegate Ferris.
Mr. Chairman, could Delegate Powell tell us who or how some of these people might be using these ramps that are not paying a fee?
Well, the ones that typically come to mind are either just canoeists or perhaps kayakers who don't have to register a boat. Under the Virginia law, the only people that have to register their watercraft are watercraft that are motorized. So again, if you're paddling, you do not have to register a boat. Now, that being said, a lot of paddlers, purchase a fishing license or a hunting license. So again, so they would be covered, they would not have to pay, the fee, because they're already paying through their purchase of a license, contributing to DGIF.
Delegate Ferris.
So, Mr. Chairman, I guess this might be a question for DGIF. My 10-year-old son and my 14-year-old son don't have to have fishing license because they're underage, but they do canoe and kayak. Would this require them to now have to buy a permit to use that?
No, under 16,
There's an exception.
there's an exemption for under 16.
16's a cutoff limit on fishing.
So, Delegate.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
No, no.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know about the follow-ups to it. What about my wife?
I know, that's what I'm asking.
Is she under 16?
No, sir. No, sir, but she doesn't like worms. So she doesn't
Okay,
fish.
well, you can use, you know, one of my favorite baits is like a broken back jitterbug, so you can try one of those. But if she,
She really likes to just get off from
yeah,
us.
so she has a hunting, well, but since her husband, I assume, has a hunting license, he would be able, or fishing license, he would be able to launch the boat there. And of course, your lovely wife could be able to ride, go on for free, which provided she would want to go out on the boat with you.
Mr. Chairman, how much is the fee?
That would have to be established by DGIF. All this does is grant DGIF the authority to do a fee or propose a fee. That would have to go through the regulatory process, which includes, you know, public meetings and input so people can come and you know, speak to the board, whether they think it's a good idea, bad idea. Maybe have, you know, so I discussed something with the James River Association, for instance, who takes school groups out, you know, and we said, well, you know, the game commission would probably be able to provide them with some kind of a special fee, whether it's an educational use. But again, this would be up to the board. You know, this just grants them the authority.
Doug Moorfield?
So, just, well, can I speak to it? Yeah.
Well, do you have questions right now?
Well, I do for DGIF. So do you all have you don't have this anywhere else? I mean, you don't have any type of fee to provide access, you know, to a certain area, public
Mr.
area?
Chairman, we have a user, I guess it's a user access permit for our wildlife management areas. So if somebody doesn't hold a current hunting, fishing license or boat registration, then they would buy this access fee, and that's typically like your equine horseback riders, bicyclers, birders, and those type of groups. And I don't have the regulation with me, but there was an amendment or an exception for groups. So if a group was going to use a wildlife management area, then the board left an exception there. But I think the user fee was either an annual permit that was about the same price as a hunting license. So I think it was around $21 or $3 a day, but I don't think we ever did the day use fee.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, just one more question. So if it's a Saturday evening and 6 o'clock, you know, and I don't know where they're gonna get these permits, maybe wherever you can buy a fishing license or a hunting license. Just to say I'm not in an area, you know, close by that I can obtain one of these permits. And so, you know, I'm a college student and I don't really have a lot of money.
I can answer the question.
You know, so what
Go to your DGIF app on your smartphone, you can purchase any kind of fee or permit you want at any time.
I have a question, so, just more of a technical question. If I go to a ramp like on the Bannister House, for example, and the ramp is there, and of course there's a concrete ramp for offloading trailers, but most people put the boat in on the grassy area beside it. I mean, the kayak and canoes. Are you only talking about those who use the concrete pad or the, I know that's technical.
They're
but
still
it's-
using the property, though they're parking there.
Right.
And those parking lots require, you know, have to be constructed, have to be maintained. I mean, so, you know, when I unload my kayak, I typically back my truck up and use the ramp.
Well, I certainly.
Again, I have a fishing license.
I certainly understand where you're coming from, because I know a lot of calls and issues you guys deal with are from those who don't pay anything, and you have to deal with those boating accidents just as well as others, so I get it.
Mr. Chairman, how are the boat ramps paid for?
Mr. Chairman, basically what we do with boat ramps is, it comes out of sport fish restoration money, so it's out of a grant or trust fund from their, it's a federal trust fund. So it's either that or a recreational boating safety trust fund. Recreational boating safety is a 50-50 grant where you have to put up 50% state money and you get 50% reimbursement. The sport fish restoration is what we typically use. We use 25% of state money, you get a 75% federal grant to help pay for those ramps. Some of the ramps that the agency owns or manages are a cooperative agreement where it's, you know, the county may have paid for a portion of it. The the state may have paid for a portion of it, and then we actually manage it or maintain it.
Billy Ferris.
The state money, the federal money, if I'm correct, the federal money comes from the sale of sporting goods.
Yes, sir.
The state money, where does that come from?
That comes from the sale of licenses, typically boat registrations, fishing licenses, that type of thing.
I think part of the genesis of this is that, is the enforcement aspect of working kayak accidents, other accidents of, where people aren't paying, to use those properties where others are, hunters and fishermen. That it would be a way for them to offset some of the time that they're probably spending on those. And I'm speaking for the part of the am,
Do you all have a prevalence rate? I mean, is this a significant problem where people are smashing into each other's kayaks and you have to go out there and see them?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Adams, we have typically about 20 fatalities a year, and we've increased to about 11 to 12 of those are actually.
Non-motorized boats?
Yes, ma'am. And then if I may add, there's 10 million brand new paddle craft entering the market a year, nationwide. So if just pure math, that's 200,000 a year in Virginia, but since we're a coastal state, I guess it's probably more like 500,000, but we don't know. And that's new craft.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Will these fees go into the general fund? We're gonna balance the budget with this?
The DGIF has it, so they do not get general fund money, DGIF, this would just go to help DGIF manage their ramps.
Darn.
Yeah, so, yes, sorry.
I have a motion when it's appropriate, Mr. Chairman.
Right?
I just want to ask DGIF, I haven't heard you state your position on this bill.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman, we have no position on it. Delegate Fowler actually approached us with this idea.
Move to report.
Second.
Have a motion to report?
Substitute motion.
Have a motion, substitute motion, take precedent.
Would you gently run this bill?
Have a motion, lay the bill on the table. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. That is a non-debatable motion. So, cast your vote on the voting board. Lay the bill on the table. Four ayes, lay the bill on the table, 3 nays. Ayes have it, the bill is just laid on the table.
All right, Mr. Chairman, the next bill is House Bill 1621. And basically, we have, DGIF offers, multiple, types of hunting licenses for various durations, and of course, most of those have to do with folks that are purchasing a non-resident hunting license. And again, I apologize for part, I can't remember the different ones for non-residents. But what this bill would essentially do is allow, be able to provide for a trip license for in-state hunters. Say if you just want to get a 3-day or 1-day permit to whatever, this would allow, TGIF to offer that, that choice for hunters. And again, the idea is, they believe it'll help with, increase the purchase of hunting licenses, which will then also then draw down some more of that, Pittman Robertson, matching money. So that's essentially what this bill does. It just allows in-state residents to do what out-of-state residents can already do, which is purchase a trip license. So that's.
For the benefit of committee, if I remember, I think it was Delegate Crockett Stock, who put the bill in for non-residents some time ago. I don't know. It's been a long time. Crockett Star, anyway.
Anyway, yeah.
It's got it.
But I remember she,
That's probably it, man.
like he we talking
I didn't hear the name, but I thought she was a color.
anyway, I think
Fancy colors.
she had put a bill in to allow for this for non-residents so that someone could come in for a day to go for Thanksgiving and go hunting. So this would allow for residents
Yeah.
to have the same, benefit. Delegate?
I don't know what truck license means.
You
Well,
want-
that's just a fancy name for buying a short license, just for 2 or 3 days. Say you're coming to visit your grandparents on the old family farm for Thanksgiving, you wanna go out and hunt, you purchase a 2-day license, or 1 day, or
For
whatever.
presumably less money, right?
Well, that, Tom can speak to that, but yes.
Mr. Chairman, we have no position on this bill again. Basically what it is permissive to allow the board to set a regulation to allow a trip license or a day or multi-day license for residents. It's already available for non-residents and for resident and non-resident anglers. But the board can't do a trip license for resident hunters. And kind of their thinking was veterans hunts, if the veterans just coming somewhere to hunt for 1 day, they can buy a 1-day license rather than an annual license, or if someone came from Northern Virginia on open day of dove season, all they want to do is hunt 1 day with their family, they can buy a day license or that kind of thing. It just gives the board that.
Mr. Chairman,
And-
sorry, go ahead.
And is it true, sir, that, I don't know what an annual license is, but an out-of-state person buying a trip license or short-term is gonna pay less than what we all pay for an annual license, right?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Sullivan, yes, sir. And what we were kind of thinking to maybe start, they have a program called R3, it's recruit, retain, and reactivate hunters and anglers, and to try to get kids and other people into hunting and fishing. And so what we were thinking, a $23 license is an annual license. If you did a 1-day license for example, if the board decided on $10, then you could have a reduced license and just try out hunting. If you don't like it, you never have to go again. If you do, you could buy multi-days or just get an annual license.
Mr. Chairman,
Delegate, right.
it's proper time I vote.
Delegate Harris, have a question?
I got a couple questions. One of them, my friend Rip Sullivan said we pay. I didn't know he bought a hunting license, but I'm
All the
glad to
time,
know-
every year, like
glad to know-
clockwork.
I'm glad to know he's gonna go hunt with me. The second thing is I would suggest if this bill doesn't say it, I would, like to say this is like to make it one permit to cover large and small game or any type of hunting. Because it's just gonna be for a couple of days, 3 days, I'd like for it to include large and small.
So your game tags as well.
Just have to have one permit. I think it would save a lot of confusion, because if we're trying to give them a break for just a 3-day hunt, might have to buy this and a large game, or this and a bow, and this and a muzzle loader, or whatever. I don't know how the board feels, how the committee feels about that.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask Mr. Guest about that, because it's like me, I think putting the people who buy, the residents who buy full-time, full permit and everything, is somewhat of a disadvantage. What's your opinion on that? What's your plan as far as licensing, I guess?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Wright, honestly, the board typically makes those decisions, so I couldn't, truthfully, I can't speak on their behalf, but normally they set license fees and determine trip licenses and that kind of thing, and since they are trying to open opportunities for hunters, I would be pretty sure they're gonna take that into account.
This
So we should
language-
leave that part up to the game commission.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Wright, that's your pleasure as a committee, sir.
I have a question for staff. Would this language allow them to, I know it says hunting license, but doesn't mention hunting and tag, there's, licenses, a state license or county license. Does this need to be amended to say, and appropriate tags for big game, if such?
I'm not sure, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Guest might know, I don't.
Mr. Chairman, that's actually covered in another code section, but this trip license allows the board to do trip licenses on any license.
Include
Resident or, yes, sir, resident or, because a license is a license, whether it's annual or big game or,
Okay.
archery or muzzleloader or whatever, it falls under that licensing wording.
Mr. Chair- yeah, I guess I'm having a little trouble understanding how to make a decision without an actual fee attached, because I wonder, like, if this increases the applications, for example, then it increases administrative costs. Would that ultimately then put people who have annual licenses, that will we then have to increase the rates for that? I mean, I just don't know the implications without knowing the fee, and I'm not sure if anybody can answer that.
I don't think you're really gonna know until it's implemented, probably. You probably have some maybe projections. Look at Paris.
I really like this bill, because my niece came in for Christmas and she wanted to go hunting, and her boyfriend wanted to go hunting. So I said, well, he's not a family member. On my daddy's farm, my niece could hunt without a permit, but he isn't a family member. So we went and got this tree stand, we gave her a gun, and we weren't very successful. But he couldn't hunt unless he was gonna spend $70 or whatever it cost him to get a permit, and he was there one afternoon. So, I think this is a great move we're making here. I think it'd be great for Park and Game to open that up for him to pay $10 or $15 a day for hunt.
Mr. Chairman,
I guess you're right.
I have a motion.
Let's hear it.
I move to report this bill, and this won't be part of the motion, but that DGIF figure out the implications of what the fee will be and what it will apply to. I just move to report.
You have a motion to report, is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of reporting, say aye.
Aye.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
I miss those days, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speeds things up.
All right. 6 to nothing. Somebody not vote? 7 nothing, okay. Bill report 7.
All right, I thank you, Mr. Chairman,
One for one,
appreciate
not
the
too
committee's
bad.
time, that's it, up just, take 500 a day, that's pretty good. Anyway, take care,
Thank you.
Thank you, brother.
The last bill, my bill?
Yes, it is.
So the last bill is my bill. It is, bill number,
1613.
thank you. Good find it. Anyway, so I'll give you a quick genesis of my bill. Rick, you had asked, Doug Sullivan, you had asked about spotlighting. And that's where this bill, genesis of this bill came from. So last year, and almost every year, I deal with, and we deal with it in our county, and I'm sure that the department can attest to the same thing, that one of the largest issues they have to deal with is spotlighting, period. And which is of course against the law, unless you have, it is against the law, you cannot shoot. You can spotlight with a permit. Written permission outside the use.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
It's like ordinance forms, don't require state gamble license.
Well, might be clear. Sorry.
Okay.
Thanks for reminding me.
All right, Dr. Evans, you'd like to present your bill?
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
I'll continue, yes, sir.
or Mr. Chairman, sorry. The lady just informed me that you have a bill up right now in another committee.
Next door?
Yes, sir.
Can I give this to Doug?
I'll take it. I'll take it. That's fine.
And I move to report. Okay, I think it's a great bill, and
The motion been made and seconded to report the bill. If there's any discussion, we can have it now.
Just a brief discussion. You want to finish the sentence you were in the middle of when it came up?
Spotlighters are shooting deer, leaving the deer in the field,
Yeah.
cutting the heads off if they're bucks, just for the trophy,
Yeah.
and leaving the bodies. I think that's a sin against nature, and it's a class 3, I moved to a class 2, it gives it more teeth, gives it law enforcement more, more they can pile on this heinous way of treating our wildlife. I don't know if the department has a.
Mr. Chairman, we have no position, but there is a regulation that talks about wanting waste and leaving a game animal without trying to retrieve it and possess it. We have no position.
Okay, ready to vote?
Yes, sir.
Please cast your vote. And the result is. Six, is that right?
That's right.
You ready?
That's all.
Move adjourned.